Well, hello and welcome. My name is Ben with Sustainable Northwest and the Northwest Community Forest Coalition. Thank you for joining. I'll just share a couple of housekeeping items before I hand it over to our session moderator, Justin, for his introduction to the panelists. We're looking forward to a lively discussion today. Please share your questions into the chat box. And after our presentations, we'll have an opportunity for a live discussion. If you'd like to speak your questions rather than type them, we'll give you an opportunity as well. Just use the session controls to raise your hand or send us a message and we'll get you queued up. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining. I'm going to hand it over to our session moderator. And then at his cue, I will stop screen share and hand over for the presentation for our featured speakers. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Justin Hall. I'm the current Vice President of the Nisqually Community Forest. My day job is Executive Director of the Nisqually River Foundation. And as I tell people, I get paid to say the word Nisqually a lot of different things in the Nisqually watershed. I have a background in silviculture and fisheries and wildlife management, but have been a nonprofit leader for over 15 years now. We have two excellent speakers for this session. The first will be Erik Kingfisher, and Erik is responsible for the leadership and direction of Jefferson Land Trust Stewardship Program. He works directly with landowners, volunteers, and other partners to monitor, protect, and restore conservation priorities in which the Land Trust holds an interest. Erik has been working in land conservation since 1999 and has been the Stewardship Director for Jefferson Land Trust since 2007. He's been an active leader in the Washington Association of Land Trusts, WALT, since its founding, and was president 2013 through 2014. With a BA in environmental education and MA in environmental politics, he has also created and annually operates the popular Tidelands Timberline Adult Natural History Course and supervises other on-the-land learning community engagement programs of the Land Trust. Erik is a really great dad, pretty good naturalist, and all-right musician. And our second speaker will be Julie Evans. Julie Evans is a program director at the Northern Forest Center, where she has worked since 2009. Julie was part of the team that originated the community forest model and is a national leader in helping communities and nonprofits acquire and manage community forests, provide a sustainable flow of ecological, economic, and social benefits. Julie uses her skills as a forester and former community planner to prepare communities and coach residents for their roles as permanent stewards of community forests. She guides them as they create governance structures, develop forest management plans, and engage in a wide spectrum of community voices in each project. Julie manages other place-based projects that integrate multiple strategies to benefit vibrant communities and healthy forests, including the redevelopment of a historic 11,000 square foot building that will house a local foods market at street level and apartments above to create in-town living spaces in Lancaster, New Hampshire. She's led numerous collaborative programs with other nonprofits and state agencies. Julie has more than 30 years experience working in the Northern Forest, including college level teaching, facilitating conservation projects, and advising landowners on forest stewardship. She has co-authored several publications, including Community Forest, the Community Investment Strategy, and is currently serving as the immediate past chair of the New England Society of American Foresters. Julie earned her MA in Environmental Education and BS in Forest Management from the University of New Hampshire. I'd like to welcome both of you to this panel. Really appreciate it, and welcome everyone who's here to listen. And I'm going to turn it over to Erik.
Great. And Julie, did you want to go first? I think that was the original plan.
Julie was first?
I think I'm supposed to go first. That's all
Okay,
good.
great.
Okay,
Cool.
I will turn it over to Julie then.
If I screen share, will this other screen sharing disappear, or does someone need to take this down?
No, Ben needs to take it down. There we go. And you should be good to go now.
All right, very good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be with you, and I'm really sorry that I don't have an excuse to fly and go to the Pacific Northwest. It's one of my favorite places. And it would have been nice to visit with all of you and even perhaps have some salmon chowder at the Skamania Lodge. So a favorite place of mine. Ben, thank you for the invitation to join you. Ben asked me to explain why I have a passion for community forests. So a tiny bit of background, and I love listening to someone else read my bio that my communications director wrote. So I do have a couple of degrees in forestry and environmental education. and have been working in New Hampshire for a long time now. My early jobs also included community planning. And so then in 2005, it all sort of came together with my first community forest project. And I got to use my skills both in community work and in forest management. And so for the last 15 years, I've been blessed with being able to do work that I really love. So thanks for joining me today. All right, let's orient you a little bit to where I am. I'm in northern New England. This is a map of the focus work area for the Northern Forest Center, which is a small nonprofit, 15 staff, been around for about 23 years now. We cover this work region of about 30 million acres and home to about 2 million people. This line between white and green are not state boundaries. Down here is southern Vermont, southern New Hampshire, and southern Maine. But that's very well developed and would be considered more suburban landscape, which is different than, of course, our northern area. Up in here, probably the top half has historically been an industrial forest landscape. Over the last 20 years, that has changed a lot, and I'll show you a subsequent map that describes that change a little bit, but very remote, rural, and not very densely populated. So our programs are actually a little bit similar to Sustainable Northwest work. We work in forest economy and trying to find ways to keep that strong and healthy, but we combine that with a lot of work in community revitalization. And so we really try to find the project points that bring together forest health, strong economies, and strong communities. And invite you to visit our website someday. So let's get down to basics. This is a truncated map, a little bit blown up. So you'll see on the left, I've cut off New York. That's because my community forest work is not, we don't really do much in New York. You'll see New Hampshire is highlighted in yellow. That's just to help you delineate between 3 states. Vermont on the left, New Hampshire in the middle, and Maine on the right. This is a project map of projects that the Trust for Public Land and or the Northern Forest Center have been doing community forest projects now for almost 20 years. Got about 50,000 acres under that project list. And those are delineated by the purple triangles. The green pieces that you see is generally conserved lands in the area. So if you look at the northern part of New Hampshire here, this is the White Mountain National Forest. This is the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont. And then up here, this is still mostly private lands, but as you can see, the important conservation work that's been done in the last couple of decades, there's lots of easements up there now, but it is primarily still, there is one, let's see, Baxter State Park is this one, that's Mount Katahdin. So that's to orient you to our map a little bit. But I also want to bring you back to the definition of community, which was interesting to hear our speakers this morning talk about, well, we don't know how to define it. Well, it's really easy in New Hampshire and New England because community for us is a town. So our states have towns, our local governments are town-based. And so our definition of community for our community forest work is usually a town. And so, for instance, in New Hampshire, there's about 284 towns in this area. I think this is about 10 million acres, maybe a little less. This is one. And in New England, we have a long history of the concept of public ownership for public benefit. In fact, it goes back to settlement patterns in the 1600s when literally town would be created and lots would be set aside for the church, and a lot would be set aside for the minister's house, and a lot would be set aside for the school. And then in the 1800s, we would have public properties that were called the poor farms. And it was where we took care of folks that needed extra help, of course. And those are town-owned lands, and they were managed as a town asset. So we have a rich history of that in New England, which I know is very different than your Western landscape. That is to say that town forests are not all community forests. I will say that. In this area, we have 400,000 acres of town-owned lands. That is the result of some soft and some very specific inventory projects. In Vermont, we have about, they have about 58,000 acres of town-owned lands. In New Hampshire, which was a result of a 3-year, very intensive study, we have 168,000 acres of town land, and that represents 4% of our forest land base in New Hampshire. And then in New Hampshire, we haven't taken on the big inventory project yet, but estimates are, particularly with some of the bigger community forest projects of late, we think we've got about 200,000 acres of town-owned land in Maine. So let's talk a little bit about community engagement. So in my work, there's sort of 3 sections or over a timeline, 3 phases of engagement. The first, of course, is pre-acquisition, when you do not have a community forest yet and you're working towards that. The second is the planning phase, where you're getting ready for a town to own a new piece of land. And then, of course, after all the acquisition work is done and you now have this community asset to take care of forever, I called that post-ownership. And we'll talk about each of these. In my work, I consider sort of my mission, or the real focus of my work is I'm trying to prepare a town or a community, if you will, for the business of owning and stewarding land. And so I have usually a 2 or a 4-year window for that, and a very specific window in terms of the planning stage of 1 to 2 years. Now, you might want to remember in any of your own projects, or even in just a conservation project, you've got a parallel tract of work happening, which is sort of the due diligence piece, which is all about preparing for the land transaction. So that's where you're doing your appraisals and your titles and your surveys, and all those other pieces that go with that. We're not going to talk about that today. We're just going to talk about how we're involving people in our engagement in our community forest project. At the very beginning of the project, it's really sort of a small focus, and what we're trying to do is really build support for that project. And the best way to do that is to we're trying to spread the word. We're getting to know the land that's involved, and we're getting to know the project, and we're trying to talk to lots of folks about that. So this can be, as much time as you have. Some projects are faster than others. You want to start in that feasibility stage with, kitchen table conversations, if you will. So around town with your various official groups, like a governing body, but also very informal conversations. What do you think about this idea? How could we do this? How do we need to get creative? Who needs to be at the table to have this be a successful project from day one? So very early, small conversations, just get the idea out there, float it. It's and this does take time. The only unsuccessful project I've ever worked on was because we did not have enough time for those small level conversations to get support built. And in New England, this support is critical because we are usually doing some sort of a town vote. That is a town meeting, which we have on an annual basis, where residents come together and vote on town government issues. And there's almost always a town vote for a community forest project. Sometimes there's multiple votes in multiple years. We start small with, you are authorized to explore the feasibility of a community forest project. The second year might be, the town government is authorized to enter into negotiations with a landowner for purchase of property. And the third vote, and the most important reason why we must do this, this really good support work is, we authorize the spending of X amount of dollars to support this project. And so it's very, very critical. In terms of how do we do this, the easiest thing is to get people out there, be specific and intentional about invitations and field trips in all seasons, with all kinds of targeted audiences, if you will. You're really trying to maximize exposure to the project and to the property, to anybody you can think of. You want people to fall in love with this property, and you want them to enjoy it and look forward to it being a community asset. So bird walks, habitat walks, tree identification walks. If you're lucky enough to be in the mountains, then do a Sunday morning snowshoe hike with hot chocolate waiting at the end. And we'll talk a little bit more about school groups, but get the school kids out there even in this early stage. When we get into the much more serious planning stage, which again, for me is typically a 1 to 2 year commitment in a town, getting them ready to have ownership and to be responsible for the management of that property and to figure out how to maximize the benefit flow. We create a planning committee. This is not, my approach is not a formal closed committee. My approach is to have monthly meetings that are open to anyone. And a great example I give, a project we had in Bethel, Maine a few years ago. The very first meeting of the planning committee was advertised. We had 80 people arrive, which was wonderful. We had a few naysayers who wanted to know what the heck was going on. And then that, as soon as they found out what was going on over the next 3 or 4 months, it really whittled down to a really strong working group of about 20. But the point is, anybody is always welcome every single month. It's a fluid committee. And I think that helps us keep track, helps us sort of make sure we're catching all the gaps of who's not at the table. If the teachers aren't showing up, make an effort to get the teachers there. If the trail runners or mountain bikers are not showing up, get them there. So what this planning stage looks like is there are 3 things we have to do during this time in preparation for ownership. 1, we're setting management priorities for that property. What does the community, what do the people want as priorities? We all talk about, multi-priority management, but what's the top priority? I have projects where education was the top priority. I have projects where timber management is the top priority, and I have projects where recreation is the top priority. It all depends upon the community, and of course it depends on the land too. So every community forest project is different. Every community forest project is going to have that highest level of priority. The second thing we're doing in terms of planning is we're developing the governance structure. That's a little bit set up with basis in state laws. Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are all a tiny bit different, but we typically have a governing commission that we're setting up during this planning phase. And then the third thing we're doing during that planning phase is we're integrating those management priorities that we talked about that will go into a stewardship or management plan for the property and for the community forest. So again, you want really good engagement by lots of different folks. So you want to try to do lots of field trips, as we talked about in the pre-acquisition phase, that continues through this time. And you want to identify who's still not at the table. So who else can you bring in to talk about and to be engaged in setting those management priorities and in setting up the work of the stewardship plan. And lastly, really, this is all about enjoying the community forest. So engage people all the time, engage them where they want to be. If they're recreationalists, engage them in recreation opportunities. If they're naturalists and scientists, engage them in the natural world. Stay in touch with people, have newsletters. For us, where the town is the focus community, we actually produce annual reports to the residents of each town. It goes in the town report every single year, a report from the governing commission to the townspeople on what's happened on the community forest that year. Think about long-term school programs, get long-term relationships going with the school and that piece of land so that the children are growing up from 1st grade to 10th or 12th grade, going to that property and, learning their whatever, a variety of different lessons over time that forest can be used to teach. So long-term educational programs. I often talk about the great marriage of the long-termness, if you will, of a community and the long-termness, if you will, of good forest management. And so it is, in terms of timeline, it works out really well. I will say one thing about the governance structure is that governance committee, however it looks, needs to understand that ongoing community engagement is part of their job. It is part of their responsibilities, and outreach is part of that. They can't just go into the back room and work with their forester or other natural resource professionals and sort of manage this land quietly. And if it's a community forest, it's strong engagement over time. Of course, the biggest challenge to that is, how do we maintain that? How do we sustain that over time? And that has to do with leadership, and it has to do with capacity. So, you know, if you have strong leaders getting through the acquisition and establishment phase of the community forest, you have to sort of set it up for successional good leadership through time to sustain those levels of engagement. So, and that is it. So I know we'll have an opportunity for questions later, and I really look forward to the discussion. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Julie. Really appreciate it. And if you have questions, please do type them into the chat, and we will connect those together with Julie at the end. We'll be logging them all. And then we're going to move right now into Erik's presentation on Chimacum Ridge.
Okay, hi everybody. Yeah, so that was really great, Julie. That's so helpful, and I'll try to sort of align some of our story with that framework that you put together there, because I think it's really helpful to have the sort of three categories there. And for everybody on this call, some of you maybe have heard of this project in the Northwest. There's several different active community forest projects happening, and this one's been going on for some time, and we've had different sort of state attention on it over time. So I want to share a bit of this story. I want to tell you a little bit about kind of where we've been with this Chimacum Ridge Community Forest project, where we're at right now and where we're going. And in particular, I want to really focus on these last 10 months or so, where we've really focused on some big community engagement efforts. So again, I'm going to start with just a sort of an overview of where we are. When I say Chimacum Ridge, I want to give you a sense of where we are in space, and then I'll give you a little sense of where we are in time, and then I'll jump into a little bit more about these last 10 months. So here's a quick map of it, and there's a little locator map down on the bottom right here. You can see that Seattle's down kind of over here. We're up here at in the Chimacum area. Port Townsend's right at the head of this little peninsula here. So near Port Townsend, Washington, is Woodby Island. I'll give you a sense. And it's about 850 acre property outlined in red. That's a real subject of what we've been focused on lately. But we also have this 65 acre piece here that's already acquired by the Land Trust. And we just opened it with some trails on Friday for some more public access. It was sort of the first phase of our community forest effort. And so that's kind of where we are in space. These are two main farmland valleys, and a part of a watershed we've invested millions in to help with its conservation over the course of time. So I'm glad to have this opportunity to protect Chimacum Ridge. So again, I just want to do this real briefly, give you a sense of where we are in time on this particular project, so that when we start talking about the kind of approaches we've taken for community engagement, it kind of all makes sense. So again, we started this project like in 2010. We started identifying this as an important place in our big community or conservation effort, conservation planning effort, where we did include a lot of community engagement at the time. The landowner at the time said, sure, we'd be happy to work with you. We were just going to sell it off for developments, but yeah, let's work together on a conservation solution. We ended up bringing in, long story short, we brought in a partner with Trust for Public Land, had been working with EFM, which is a private equity fund, who was very interested in doing this exact kind of thing with being a bridge owner for conservation endeavors like this. It's been a great partnership. They ended up selling the development rights, and that was wonderful. So we kind of took a deep breath. It's not going to be subdivided and developed. And we then started marching forward on this longer term strategy. EFM needed to hold it for about 7 years. So we have a 2023 acquisition date. So we have a purchase and sale agreement as a land trust to purchase this property in 2023 from an investment group. And so we just got to work. In that period of time, we acquired a conservation easement on the property with help from the state of Washington, who wanted to see this as a pilot project for sustainable or ecological forestry. in the state that they can point to, that we can all point to and say, hey, this is an example of sort of a different approach to forestry that benefits multiple things, you know, ecological benefits, social benefits, et cetera. And so that was achieved. We have this conservation easement on the property. Now we're getting into the sort of final phase of this effort to acquire the property. So we have about 2.5 years before we're going to be able to acquire this actual property. And looking at this timeline, we determined that, well, let's get started with our more deep community engagement and really defining what we mean by a community forest in this circumstance and in this community. What do we really mean by that? So that's a little context for you, just give you sort of an overview of where we're at and where we have been. And over the last 10 months or so, we've really taken a deep dive into community engagement. We participated, or well, in looking at that timeline, we determined that, hey, you know what, Nisqually Land Trust did over there with the Nisqually Community Forest, they worked with the National Park Service Rivers and Trails Conservation Assistance Program, which is a program that you may have heard of, but it's a program that you can compete for some capacity from the National Park Service, RTCA, to apply some planners, some professional planners to a project, a community-based conservation project. And this was a good fit. So they awarded us some planning capacity. We had 3 different staff members dedicated to this project. And it was really fun to work with them through this process. So we started in November having conversations with them. And by January, we kind of had a plan together about, well, what is our ultimate outcome that we'd like to have, and what kind of community engagement strategy we're going to employ. And that's what I want to tell you more about. So basically, starting about January, we started really working with our community to help define this community forest over this really iterative, incremental process to ultimately establish a couple different documents. And those are going to be shared here. I think maybe they're in the chat. A couple different documents that I encourage you to check out. It'll basically reiterate a lot of what I'm telling you right now. We tried to create these documents that are an outline of what we've been doing and really defining what we mean by community forest. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But it also includes an outreach and engagement strategy that really goes right to what Julie was talking about with effectively the tail end of this planning period and going into the acquisition period as well. So I think we've got it all spelled out, and it hopefully is a good roadmap for other people, or you could look at these and say, oh yeah, I see how they did it, and this is helpful for our, you know, your individual project somewhere else. Let's see, getting into that specific process, there's a couple different ways I'll describe that. There's this graphic that kind of spells it out. So we had this basic opportunity. We want to do this this community engagement effort, and we determined in the box there, we have this project team. Project team became the core component of a lot of the work that was done. And then they defined something called the Stakeholder Advisory Group. And that is another group that they define for community leaders out there in our area. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the project team, but we've got all these other elements of it. Basically, all this marching towards this, this community forest acquisition and all the continued public engagement. So I thought this was kind of helpful as a graphic. And the project team was really, again, the core group. We had about 13 people. They're just awesome people in the community. Just, you know, wherever you live, you know, there's just these leaders and just wonderfully smart people who have a real skill set and real sense of place in this watershed, and brought a whole lot of skills and a whole lot of ideas and a whole lot of sort of authentic leadership to this process. And that group of 13 people we called the project team. And we really had, we had a lot of conversations with them. We started with a group meeting at the Grange, then we had a couple other meetings, and then COVID hit. And so we started doing these, you know, through Zoom. Every couple of months, we had some pretty heavy meetings to work through the nuts and bolts of some of the work that I'll describe here. They also are the ones that also identified that, what I mentioned before, a stakeholder advisory group. The stakeholder advisory group was 20 to 30, maybe 40 people that that were identified across by these folks that are from the area that represent a whole broad suite of interests in the community. And so we engage them in a series of tours and a series of meetings as well, and also through some surveys, which I'll talk about. So the project teams work, and this is again just community leaders in the area. They came up with this overall plan. They're going to develop a mission, vision, and values statements for this particular project. They're going to start to prioritize the possibilities for this place and the benefits that could be generated for the community. And then also they're going to focus on how to best incorporate community engagement over the course of time, both through this initial process and then over time. So when I think about what Julie was describing earlier, you know, we have gone through a lot of pre-acquisition work over the course of the last few years. I mean, since 2010, I've probably led like 40 or 50 tours up on this place. And then this I would think, I think falls into this planning category. We're going to be in this planning session for this planning more nuts and bolts work for another year or two before really getting to that acquisition phase. And like I said, there's sort of this bedrock component of how we're thinking about community forest, and the community forest it's been put together by a lot of different minds, right? And when we thought about, well, what is all this work going to result in, and how is it going to really affect the future of this forest? These are the sort of bedrock components of it that I think the project team and everybody involved is considering, that these things should be the guidepost, I guess, for what all the future decisions that are being made refer back to. So I just thought I'd share them as a reference point, if nothing else. And mission, vision, I'll read them out real quick. The mission of the Chimacum Ridge Community Forest Project is to sustain the ecological, cultural, and economic benefits of this community-driven working forest for generations to come. Chimacum Ridge Community Forest is a resilient forest for all, connecting communities and modeling regenerative relationships with the land. So thinking out 100 years, this is what we really wanted to see. And we also have this values wheel that, you know, all these different values were described, and they're all sort of interconnected with the ecological, economic, and social benefits that are being considered by this community forest, the benefits that they would like this forest to create. And each of these values align with that. So in the documents that you'll have there, the strategic vision framework has more elaboration around what these values really mean, or what the team, the project team meant by that. Great. So we talked about ownership and governance. Another thing that project team was tasked with, and really we're just kicking this out to the community and saying, hey, what do you think? You know, how do we best do this? How do we best create a community forest, and what's the best approach? And the ownership and governance strategy was determined by the project team. And they, it's a long story, but they determined that the land trust should create a subsidiary organization to hold this community forest and be the owner. And that would have a board, and that would be a community forest board. And then there would be all this community access to that board. And so that's kind of described in that document as well. And I think it's maybe worth mentioning that, you know, as Julie was describing, you know, when we think of community forestry over in the Northeast, I think in large part there's, you know, an emphasis on the public ownership through the towns, and that's not exclusively the case. But I think that, you know, over here, our public institutions aren't prepared for that, or they're not interested in that. So the land trust is sort of holding that space for this kind of function in this community, and it's a little bit of an obvious role for us to play in this circumstance. They also went through and decided, or, you know, determine what were some of the priorities. What are ways we can create economic, social, and ecological benefits? What are the things we can imagine doing, and what are the priorities for those? And so I just, you know, here's this basic you know, graph just as an illustration of the kinds of work we were doing through survey work, through conversations, through our meeting discussions to come up with some prioritizations for the public access, recreation, and education elements of community forestry. And then we also talked about economic activities. What are some of the economic activities that should be priorities for this community forest? And so here's some examples. And there was a lot of consistency across the board. I mean, there wasn't a lot of argument about all this. It was more deliberative conversations, and what it meant to really emphasize the balancing act of the economic and social benefits of a community forest. And I guess I just want to circle back and just emphasize some of what Julie said. These all these conversations, all this work to just talk through all of these things was, I think, exactly what we needed to do to, I guess, bring our community up to speed a little bit more on what do we even mean by community forest? What is a community forest? And I guess I'll digress a little bit just right now to say what makes this, I think, so different than a lot of the stuff we've done here at the Land Trust is we're trying to make this not just another cool land trust project. This is meant to be a community project. And so through this process of a real broad community engagement effort, we're trying to you know, basically, yeah, just make it more of a community project and not really just another land trust conservation project, if you know what I mean. I think that's an important element of what we've both learned and sort of emphasized throughout this last 10 months as well. And I think it's really strengthened the concept and also the likelihood of this actually coming to fruition. So we did all that with the projects team, and then we went back when we circled into this strategic stakeholder advisory group. The stakeholder advisory group then was basically given an opportunity to review all of this stuff, determine if this is all on point or off the mark or whatever, through surveys, through conversations, through tours, and with that feedback, then we were able to then refine and really strengthen the strategic vision framework. And you know, the information that we put in there is reflective of this much broader coalition of people. And getting down into the priorities, again, we did all these surveys. We're testing the basic components. We're really trying to get people to consider the different ways in which we can imagine this happening. And through all of that, the prioritizations came through. So there's a ton of different you know, survey results that I thought about I might share, but it's just all specific to this particular project, so it's not really relevant to the bigger picture that we're talking about here. But there was just a lot of coming around and having some authentic conversations, both in big groups through Zoom and also individually different people. And then when we talk about going forward, kind of this getting closer to acquisition and then post-acquisition stuff, the real emphasis of the community and this engagement process so far has been to emphasize that we want to continue to engage everyone. If this community forest is going to work, you know, people have to love it, and it has to be a gem in our community. And we want to really connect people to that land and the benefits of that land, and really connect people to the benefits of a working forest, and really build it into our culture. So we have an outreach and engagement plan that is an accompaniment to the strategic vision framework. So those are available to you guys. And I think I could talk forever about all this. So I kind of want to be mindful that we do want to take a lot of time here for some question and answer to really get into the inquiry from everybody else. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing and pass it on.
Well, great. Thank you both. We have had a bunch of questions come in the chat box, and I'll read some of those out. You know, I do want to say that you have some of the best graphics, Erik. Wonderful drawings that I don't see.
Yeah, those came from some of the National Park Service team. Alex over there has a skill set.
Right. You know, I mentioned that it didn't mention at the beginning, but I do serve on the Northwest Community Forest Coalition's executive team, and behind putting together this forum and moving it virtually this year. And I really want to thank Sustainable Northwest for all of their work staffing for the Northwest Community Forest Coalition, and for making this work virtually. Thank all of our sponsors. Talk a little bit really quickly that Nisqually Community Forest experience, we really followed that path that Julie laid out, with lots of pre-meetings with the community and a whole team of people that were interested, much like Erik. I went through the purchase, and our struggle has really been getting the community engagement post. We've had a couple field trips. COVID certainly changed some of that. We do have a great hut-to-hut ski trail system that's in there, and that gets the wider community. Doesn't necessarily get a lot of the local folks, but people from Seattle and farther that travel down to use that. And definitely one of our struggles is that we're 4 miles in and 2,000 feet up on a forest road, so it's not walkable in there. So it has to be a really a decision to get people up in there. We're doing a tour or something like that. It's harder for our community to just go and visit it. It's a mainline road, so we can't just make it open. We don't own that 4 miles beforehand necessarily. So some of the questions, I know Julie, you answered this one a little bit, but do towns seek out your services, help setting a community forest up, or do you typically target a town and propose setting up a community forest? You want to talk about that a little bit more, or?
Yeah, so the way that the projects come to us are typically either a town approaches us because they like the concept of a community forest, in which case that takes a few years to sort of find a piece of land, or a town comes to us and other partner organizations with, hey, this piece of land is for sale and we think it would be a great community forest. So oftentimes I've described the community engagement process, which is really my specialty, but we often have partner organizations. Trust for Public Land is one of our usual partners, or local land trusts as well. And so oftentimes we sort of all get together. They call me, I call them, in terms of putting together multiple organizations. We don't go searching. I wouldn't say we go searching for projects. In some of our community revitalization work, in which we're doing a lot more community work, we will say, hey, do you have a town forest and are you maximizing your benefits? And then we'll engage with them at that level, which is different than the whole buying of a new piece of land as I've described.
Right. And then you mentioned in your presentation that not all town forests are community forests. How do you distinguish between the two?
Right, so our definition in our region of a community forest has 4 elements. I know this is a whole nother talk, so I'll be quick. First is town ownership or a nonprofit ownership on behalf of and with partnership with the town. 2, that there's involvement and engagement by the town in the management thereof. That's what we're talking about today. 3, that some of the priority setting matches up with other town priorities. And 4, always permanent protection in the form of a conservation easement or other tools therefore. So you can have a town that doesn't do much with their town forest. They might manage it, they might not manage it. They might use it for recreation, they might not. The school might be engaged, the school might not be engaged. We were pleasantly surprised in our New Hampshire inventory to find out that 65% of our towns do have their town lands permanently protected. But we went into that study not assuming that. So those 4 elements are what we call a community forest, and that is separate from just generally land owned by the town.
Great. As we try to approach community engagement during COVID, do you have any suggestions? The person who asked the question said we have not been able to hold property tours for months, and certainly understand that, and we're definitely the same way.
I'm not doing very well with that one.
That's fine.
I think that, we are doing less field trips. We're doing field trips with, I have one project going now. We did 9 field trips in September with a maximum of 10 people per. And so that was a lot of staff time. But it got people out there. People are hungry to get on these lands. You all know that. And so you just have to be a little bit more creative. We are doing Zoom meetings for the planning process, which is hard for all of us. We're doing our best and using some of the new tools that are available with technology. And I think it just sort of, shall I say, it reduces the pace a little bit. You just have to do it a little slower because of that spreading out of how often you can get people there and how the technology is going to support the process. I don't know if Erik wants to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, we obviously pivoted to the Zoom world for our projects team meetings and our stakeholder advisor group meetings. And we continue to run some tours. We just kept them to, I think it was like 5 people, and we, just had a caravan up through the forest. We have a pretty good loop road up there, so pretty much even a sedan could manage that. And we just had everybody drive their own vehicles, and then we kind of park and kind of stand around and mask up if we needed to get close and look at a map or something. So, but we did keep it down, and it did affect things for sure.
The other thing you want to pay attention to in that is, for some of our projects, we don't have open access to that property until it's purchased. Or
yeah, same.
Sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And so, maybe you're able to say, hey, go visit that on your own schedule. More than likely you have to be guided and scheduled. So that is a challenge.
Yeah, fortunately, forests are good for social distancing, and
yes,
and, outdoors is considered safer also. Somebody pointed out that, Rebecca pointed out that Jefferson Land Trust is also starting a virtual engagement series in November to connect people with the project. The Nisqually Land Trust has been doing a virtual engagement series on their properties, and they're featuring the Nisqually Community Forest tomorrow night. So after I finish the Northwest Community Forest Coalition, and jump into that one. So it's all forest tomorrow. So just, yeah, doing the best we can, I think.
Yeah, and I definitely think we're getting less attendance at the Zoom meetings than if we were in person, which is too bad, but.
Right. And lastly, Julie, can you speak to more of the role of engaging students in building community support for a community forest project, and any lessons learned in working with students in schools?
Right. So yes, I could talk a little bit about that. One is I have one town that has been very successful for many, many years. They've owned the land forever. A lot of it comes from strong teachers who are interested, right? So the program lasts as long as that strong teacher is interested. But I have one town that had really nice high school level interest in that town forest. And so every year the kids were going out in different seasons and doing different things. I think I remember a particular good one with, forest measurements tied to trigonometry and geometry, which was fabulous. So that's one example at the high school level. The other example with a small town, again, small town, 100 kids in the school, they're out on that community forest building the trails. And they love that place and they're so proud of it. And last year, I know one of the older boys, I would say 6th grade-ish, I guess, would say, to his teacher, "Oh no, I would never drive my ATV on the town forest, Mrs. Morris." So it becomes a special place for them. If you can get them out on it, if you can get them engaged in it, again, strong teacher is really what you need. And again, as we talked before about that sort of sustainability thing, get the teachers engaged, get the whole school engaged so that the children do have exposure to that land. Many of us are in the rural landscape. We're all very spoiled with access to land. That is not true for everybody. And it's not even true socioeconomically in terms of assuming that children can get to the woods. So if you create that special relationship through their town, through their schools, not only does it get them excited, it exposes their parents to the concept, and all will benefit from that. I hope that was helpful.
Very, I think. Move a couple of questions now for Erik. The question was, does the subsidiary need to be a land trust as well, and does it need to be accredited? And I think that was a specific question to a part of your presentation of having a subsidiary organization own the community forest.
Right. No, thanks. So the way that it's been contemplated so far, and again, we kind of looked at how Nisqually Land Trust did it. They created a subsidiary, I think it's 501c3, right? That holds and owns the community forest, but that entity is wholly owned by the Nisqually Land Trust. And so we looked around a lot of different models, and we determined that something like that would work best for us. So, Jefferson Land Trust 501c3. We already have an LLC that we own and manage for other projects. And then we're talking about creating another subsidiary specifically with the purpose and function of owning and managing this community forest. We have another one that we're building out too. So it's going to be sort of it's just another subsidiary organization owned by our 501c3. And so the accreditation will just be with our 501c3, but it's one of basically our programs. It's a business program of our land trust that then, it has its own books and it has its own accountability within there, but it also has to be accountable to the land trust. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and we at Nisqually, we're a type 1 supporting organization to the land trust. So they are our one member and they determine who's on the board. But then we are legally responsible on the board of taking care of the organization, and we are separate and distinct so that liability doesn't flow both ways either. So that works well for us. Yeah,
great. Yeah, so hopefully that helps answer the question.
And then there was a question on explaining how the National Park Service's Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program works. You mentioned they can help lend additional capacity to local conservation projects. What exactly does that look like? Who qualifies? And I don't know if we want Julie to step in and talk about that, or if you feel like.
Yeah, I'd welcome that for sure.
I can't help you with that question. I've not worked with the National Park.
Oh, the other Julie, Francisca de Borges is on the phone.
My sorry.
That's okay. But yeah, it's it's a fantastic program National Park Service runs. And there's Julie. She was our project manager for this. So Julie, you want to just give a quick overview of how that works?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the invitation to pop on real quick. I am Julie Fonseca-Borges. I'm with the National Park Service's River Trails and Conservation Assistance Program. Every year, the RTCA program selects projects across the country to support that are recreation, that improve access to recreation or conserve land, outdoor space. We spend a lot of initial time just trying to figure out how our services and our support can best complement what our partners already have going on for them. And it was a dream to work with the Jefferson Land Trust. They're a great group of people, have awesome community support and a lot of capacity and energy behind working with the community. So they had a very aggressive timeline, and we were happy to help facilitate this next step of the process for the community forest. And our support ranges just based on what partners need and what the project needs. And like I said, a lot of that initial conversation is about trying to figure out, well, what is the scope of the project and how can we best help? So, about it. Happy to chat with anybody offline.
Yeah, and it was really key for the Nisqually Community Forest to have that ability to work with Brian Bowden at the time, who retired, and then we made him the president of our community forest. We kept him on the project in retirement, but just having that person who was in charge of making sure the larger group of community members got together really was key, since the rest of us on the board all work for a different organization. We're doing this, out of a passion for it and a love of it, but it's hard to manage all those different things.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say we wouldn't have gotten nearly as far without that support from our TCA and National Park Service. So I do encourage it if anybody's got a big meaty project in front of them that would align with that program, take a look, because it was helpful. It was really helpful to have that capacity and really that drive. Yeah,
and we actually have had two projects from our TCA. They helped us create a river trail in the Nisqually watershed through the Nisqually River. So it's been great to work with them. All right, another question, Eric. I'm going to give it to you, and then I can probably weigh in a little bit too. But in Port Gamble, they said we were able to buy 3,500 acres of land through a similar model that you presented, but not the trees for the Port Gamble Forest Heritage Park forest with a question mark. So now we're in pursuit of a campaign to purchase the trees on the land. We're trying to become a community forest. Do you have ideas about how to become a community forest in the state of Washington?
I mean, that's great. I think that whole project is so cool. It's really just across the water from us. So it's cool to see that so much good work's gone into that so far. And how to become a community forest with that project. I guess I don't know all the details of it to know, like, structurally, that ownership and governance question is really, I guess, fundamental to what it is. To create a community forest, you have to have some sort of model for that. So I don't know what that looks like for that particular project, but I'd encourage you to take a look at the Northwest Community Forest Coalition website. It's really good. It's got a lot of great resources on there, a lot of different reports, different studies, different avenues people have taken for community forestry. And so Northwest Community Forest Coalition website is a really great resource for anybody on this call who's interested in community forestry. Just spend some time on there and read some of those reports and some of those studies, because it does give you a lot of framework and outlines. And that was really helpful for us as we started contemplating just some of the big fundamentals of, like, okay, we know we want to make this community forest, but what does that even really mean and look like? And what are some sort of pitfalls that people have found? And what are some of the core things we definitely have to address in this initial process? And by looking at that stuff that's available there, stuff that Nature Conservancy has done and otherwise, there's been some really great stuff already done. So take a look at that. I think would be my best advice on that.
Yeah, and I would very much agree that that's what the Northwest Community Forest Coalition is set up to do. Reach out to members. Happy to talk with folks. I've talked with Chimacum. Getting your community involved is a big part of that, and with the fundraising efforts, that will be there. Legally, if you're a community forest, if you say you're a community forest, and we talk about definitions and things like that, but it's just on you to be that way, or to be a community forest. I would have recommended, I don't know if you took advantage of, there is a community forest funding program at the state. Unfortunately, the application for this year closed recently. We're moving forward with that, but that in the future can be one way to help perhaps get some more funding for buying the trees if you have time, or purchasing additional lands. So that program is moved through the legislature this year, and then I assume we'll do it again next year. So it's another place to look for funding. A lot of resources again on Northwest Community Forest .org on community forests. And last question I have so far for you, Erik, did you have any trouble with anti-land trust / anti-government people in your community? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Well, you know, we didn't have anything come up as far as like, yeah, no, like anti-land trust stuff necessarily in that process. We're, you know, we feel pretty separate from like government entities too. And not many people confuse us with like a government institution. There's certainly, you know, we have an element of sort of independent anti-government kind of folks out there, but didn't really happen. I think part of it is because fundamentally what this community forest element is, or project is really trying to do, is establish a form of local control of our community resource, and that's pretty. I mean, most people really find themselves on common ground in that level, and they can get it one level or another. We all kind of can agree that some local control in this circumstance is going to be great. I guess this gives me a chance to articulate something you'll read in the strategic vision framework, is that one element of this project that really shined for all of us, I think, is it helped us as a community have bigger conversations about a lot of things, including equity and inclusion, and how in the conservation movement, that's not necessarily been a part of the conservation movement. There's definitely been white supremacy baked into some of the conservation movement from the beginning in America. And so having that come forward in a community conversation like this was helpful and powerful, and it helped ground the project to ask this question, like, who's this really going to benefit, and how's it going to actually meaningfully benefit people that have otherwise been marginalized or, you know, underserved and whatever. And I think that was great. That was a great conversation to have. And it also sort of, it just elevated the, like both the importance of this project and the opportunity for this project to bring even more community cohesion around sustainable land management and access, and I don't know, I think it built some good connections just by having the conversation.
Yeah, and Julie, do you have any commentary on that, on the kind of the anti-forces?
No, but I will agree with Erik that much of our community forest work in the East is all about local control. And in fact, many of our projects or the impetus for a town being interested is they're tired of poor forest management by private owners, and they want control of that forest to manage it in a more sustainable and acceptable, if you will, way. And again, that sort of long-term vision. Okay, if we're going to have a strong forest economy here, then someone needs to step up and start taking care of these forests. And that local control is absolutely part of the conversation for us in our work. I would like to add something that I forgot to say earlier, Justin, about a really great tool for long-term engagement. I have one town in the East, it's Randolph, New Hampshire, and they have their own website if you want to look it up. They have an annual community forest day. It's the first Saturday of every August, and they've done it for 20 years. And if you can create traditions like that, then that's going to help engagement last. This particular town happens to have a lot of summer residents. And so, you know, they tied it to that summer calendar, but that can be you do it for 3 or 4 years and you've got a tradition of bringing people to that forest on the same day every year. So that's a great tool I wanted to share.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we, in some of our early meetings with the community, where our community forest is the community of place, had, you know, both the folks that thought that we would not harvest any trees and it would just become another preserve, and the folks that didn't want to see us ever harvest another tree again. And so we talked through them. You know, we have actively been doing multiple entry thinnings. We've been harvesting the last 3 years, so the the group that didn't feel like we would do forest management has been placated or is understanding. And then, we're able to show stands that have been treated and haven't been treated. And with the thinnings, you can definitely see differences in those, and they tend to look healthier. We have really dense forest currently right now, and so that has worked with those folks that don't want to see you cut another tree. So it's just opening and being out there and explaining. And if somebody's just truly anti something, then you can explain till you're blue in the face. But generally, folks getting an idea of what you're doing can usually come to some reconciliation of what the forest will look like. Just one of those things you got to build up over time. And then I had a question that: have small city planning commissions been engaged in creating a community forest, and have community forests been included within the city's comprehensive or master plan? And I don't know the specific answer to this. I'm sure Montesano has a community forest here in Washington that they've funded their town with over many, many years, and it's very strongly integrated into the town of Montesano. So or city of Montesano, I think technically. So I'm sure that has been there. I know Owaco is we're working on a community forest, protecting some of the headwaters to their drinking watershed. So I know it's probably been there, and probably city of Bremerton also. But Erik, do you know of any other ones, or anybody from Sustainable Northwest that would know of others?
I mean, the city of Arcata is a big
That's the one
one.
that comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that too.
It's a good leading, it's worth checking out, how they do it. They have a forester on staff and a committee. I was on the committee for a while, way back when.
Yeah, and very much when the Nisqually Community Forest was organizing, we looked at many different methods of ownership, from a private for-profit, LLCs, government ownership, nonprofit ownership, and government ownership certainly is something we see a lot back there on the East Coast with Julie. Not as much out here, but there is some, and once there is that, then those planning commissions and all that become a part of it. So yes, Arcata, California.
Arcata.
Arcata, yeah. So those are all the questions that people have asked in the chat. We still have just under a half an hour left in our session. So I guess I'd invite folks to start a conversation. Feel free to unmute yourself or put yourself on video. And if you have questions for Erik or Julie or myself, happy to answer them. Also, if nobody does, I'm sure everyone's happy to get a half an hour back in their day, less Zoom. But give people a few minutes if you want to unmute yourself and have a conversation. That would be great. One comment just come through. Erik, could you talk more about how you're working with EFM? So explain EFM as a name.
Yeah, so there's lots of different, when we first started this project, it didn't seem like this kind of thing existed very much, but in the 4 or 5 years that we were seeking funding originally from 2010 till about 2014, a couple different things started happening, and these private equity funds started being developed, and EFM is an important partner. I mean, they've been great to work with. EFM is based out of Portland. It's a private equity fund that's owned by EcoTrust, the nonprofit, and it's an investment group that has a for-profit objective, but it's also got this objective of helping forests be managed more sustainably. Transition them to community forestry or any number of different approaches to sustainable forest management. And so this project just fit really well with their intentions, and they were great. They did a great job negotiating with the original landowner and getting all the timber rights after a struggle, but we got them all, and that was great. So we've got a great, strong relationship with them. Like I said, our relationship is now sort of articulated in this purchase and sale agreement, and we'll be working with them for the next 2-3 years until we can negotiate a sale or actually make the sale happen, and that'll be based on an appraisal at the time. And they have a senior forest. They have several foresters, and for what it's worth, just working with them on now I'm monitoring the property for the conservation easement that we hold, and so and they've been great to work with as far as just kind of following through when there's something that needs to be addressed or whatever. They're good managers.
Yeah, the question also was wondering how you fundraising for a moving target.
Yeah. So we don't know exactly how much we're going to have to raise, but we have a ballpark, and it'll be based on an appraisal closer to the acquisition date. And again, we've already bought down. The development rights are gone. We bought down through a ecological forest management conservation easement. So there's several $1 million that have been bought out, and so there's just the remainder land value and the remainder timber value to fundraise for.
Yeah, and I mean the market is always changing, but the value of forested timberland doesn't fluctuate as much as say timber prices do. I mean, so you can have a pretty good idea, and appraisal is usually good for a year once it's done. So you'll have about what it is. In the Nisqually, we're looking at $4,000 to $4,500 an acre for forested timberland. So you can kind of do the math on the back of the envelope and know where you're going to need to be with value, and then you get the appraisal and you have a year to finish it. So
got a couple anecdotes I can share too that might be helpful. One of the purposes of this project, I think, for us is in our conservation plan that we published in 2010 was to help connect people to the benefits of working forests, because I think there's this massive disconnect between most people in our community and our, residents of Jefferson County and working forests and like what forest management really looks like. And we recognize that both in like all of the members and sort of supporters of the land trust and just generally in our community, there's just very, very few people have been to like an active harvest, for example, and kind of understand how it's being done or what the equipment is being, why those trees and not those trees and those kind of questions. Most people don't have a grasp of that. And so this community forest is a way in which we can kind of fulfill this part of our conservation plan. One of the things we can do to fulfill this sort of objective in our conservation plan. And an anecdotal story that I think kind of emphasizes just how I think or demonstrates that is, it was like 3 or 4 years ago when we were really starting to get this ball rolling on this Chimacum Ridge project. And EFM was starting their first harvest up there. I think it was 2016 or something. They were doing the forest was 40-ish years old. So it was all mostly Doug fir, and they were doing a thinning and a commercial thinning to kind of increase biodiversity and increase structural diversity and increase some of the ecological values of the forest while also pulling off some logs. And so we said, hey, great, well, let's organize a tour. And so we got the word out through our outreach avenues, like, okay, it's a Wednesday at 10 a.m. like show up and we'll head up there. And most of our nature tours or whatever we run as a land trust, we might get 10 or 20, 15 people or something like that. 85 people showed up to this thing on a Wednesday morning because they wanted to know about forestry. And it was like, awesome, okay, how are we gonna do this? So we all caravan up there, kind of got people up there and then, kind of walked around down these forest roads and saw the Harvest Act in action, and with a forester there to interpret it with me. And it was fantastic. And it was a good reminder that, I think we're on track with something. Like people do want to understand this better, and they want to know that there is an alternative to 20th century forestry, the forestry around here that really annihilated our salmon runs, that that was done in a way that wasn't as mindful as it could have been. And so we're in the sort of 21st century forestry. There's other ways to do this, and we can manage things differently in a way that might produce more benefits to the community. And I think that leap from what the sort of I don't like forestry to it can be done in a responsible way, and that kind of meets my values. Let me learn more about that. We're kind of in that transition phase right now.
And we all use paper products and forest wood products. Yeah, you guys were using that cut to lick system, and it was pretty cutting edge in terms of forest technology right now too. So I know even I have been to a lot of forestry sides, was impressed when I got to go up there and see that.
Good.
Do you have a model of a sustainable forest in the Northwest with age diversity of trees?
Well, there's a lot written on that. There's a lot of work that's been done to describe like how many snags per acre and how much downwood to have and how much, to like meet all the forest ecology functions while also producing timber. We tried to craft something that's well suited for this particular forest in our conservation easement that we now have on the property that provide some parameters around forestry in the future, so that all forestry in the future has to meet some of these basic parameters are outlined in the conservation easement, and those are articulated a bit in the strategic vision framework as well. But it's it's large. There's got to be a distribution of large trees. There's got to be a wood on the wood on the ground. There's got to be snags retained and things like that. So I think there's lots of ways you can articulate that, and we did our best with that. The way we nuance the language in the conservation easement. So that might be a good starting place for, if that, I don't know if that answers your question, but there has been a lot written on that.
Yeah. Then we've been asked what are the biggest obstacles to implementing your projects. I know for the Nisqually, it's always funding. Forests are really expensive, and figuring out how to fund those purchases, which need to be done also at an industrial scale. You're not buying 10 acres at a time. You're usually buying a section at a time or more. So that's, for us, has been the big obstacle. Erik.
Yeah, I guess that's it too. And that's also been a success too. Like we found, we put the vision out there, and Trust for Public Land showed up with the EFM. It's like, oh, look at that, this will be perfect. and then they sold the development rights to the REPI program, the Readiness Environmental Protection and Integration Program of the Department of Defense. We have access to that funding through our region. And then our friends at Washington Environmental Council said, hey, we'd like to make a case to have the state buy a conservation easement on this property as a demonstration and a pilot. And boom, we were able to achieve that with a state partnership. So the funding has sort of come, and it's in a sort of iterative process where we've got the vision and we've got a sort of plan, and it's coming together. And but we're not talking about going even bigger with like in Nisqually with this 40,000 acre vision. It's we haven't gotten that far yet. But
and that leads into the next question was, for each of us, all three of us, what would be your wildest dream for the future of community forest? So maybe Julie, I'll give that one to you first, since we've been doing all the talking, and then work our way through.
Wildest dreams. Wow, what a question. So I'll give a couple small ones. One is when I started this work 15 years ago, we usually bought really nice pieces of land. And now it feels like every time we have a piece of land, the landowner has taken all the timber value off first. So it's a little bit hard to create excitement and inspired work in community forests when I tell the townspeople that, yeah, you won't get any revenue for 40 or 50 years. So my wildest dream is that we could be buying timbered land again instead of just land. And of course, also, I think sustained engagement over time. If towns and communities are really enjoying and maximizing the benefits they get from this forest asset, then my work is complete.
Thanks. Erik?
okay, cool. It's a fun question. I think very locally with a lot of stuff, right? And I think trying to think very long term a lot of stuff too in my work here at the Land Trust and in general. And I think my wildest dreams for community forests, in this place where I'm engaged, I guess is that when this community forest fully comes online and the community forest board is functional and the community is engaged in the process and they're using the forest and access, and it's starting to become integrated into the community fabric, that there'll be this broad and sort of durable recognition that there is a profound amount of benefits and wealth that comes from these forests that are all around us. We're a forested land base here, and that recognition, I hope, will inspire more conservation and maybe more community forestry in all of our little communities, town centers and community centers in this area. That it will inspire a new cultural connection with forests that is based on a reciprocal relationship, that we can take care of the forest and the forest will take care of us, and we can do this forever if we just do it right.
That's nice, Erik. You could write that down.
Yeah, and I think, parochially, I look at, we would love to, the Michelle watershed is about 30,000 acres, some of that owned by the state in the LB Hill State Forest, but we would love to own all of the private commercial timberland in the watershed and manage it for timber and for the community and for salmon. We talk of ourselves being a salmon forest. Somebody wants to give me $500 million, we can make that happen tomorrow. but like I said, funding is always the issue. But so, yeah, my dream is for us to own all of the Nisqually Forest, to have a small mill back in, to have products there, to really have this local movement in the Nisqually, producing jobs, producing areas for recreation. You know, one of the biggest challenges we see with the community has is that the private industrial landowners have gone to a permit system for access to lands that they once had access to, and so we'd like to reopen up access to community members, but also not have it destroy what you love. So that's my parochial goal, and as part of the Northwest Community Forest Coalition, I love being a part of this movement towards community forest in the Northwest. It's been around on the East Coast for as long as the country has been in some ways. Certainly growing. We went and visited the Down East Lakes and what they've done there in Maine, but it's a new concept out here in the West, and I love being a part of that, and I'd like to see that continue to grow and continue to have more community forests throughout the Northwest. Let's see. Two other questions. In a very small retirement community, what is the harder nut to crack, community support or funding? I think that might be for you, Julie.
I'll take a crack at it. I mean, I think that community support is going to be easy because there's an appreciation, I think, when people have time and space to be outdoors at that age. And I think fundraising doesn't have to be difficult, but if you're going to compare the two, I would say fundraising would be harder.
Yeah, and I mean, I could speak from a small retirement community. Well, I mean, Jefferson County is the second oldest county in Washington,
Okay.
and it's mostly, I think our median age is 50 something, 59 or something like that, and so we got mostly older community, but I guess that at the same time they're very supportive of the land trust. I mean, that's how we do it. I mean, we operate mostly from donations, it seems, in our annual budget, but the community forest acquisition dollars are coming from a variety of sources, like I was saying before, and it's you have to look outside your local community to get over the hump of that. That being said, we are going to be running a capital campaign, so some of this work that we've been doing is sort of a runway up to a feasibility study for a capital campaign, and which will include what we need to acquire Chimacum Ridge as well, and so we'll be looking to our community to really step forward in a big way with this capital campaign relatively soon, and so that's all part of the strategy of how we're engaging everybody and making sure everybody's up to speed, so that we can make sure everybody's also inspired to give. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, I'm with you, Julie. I love to buy older forest when it's possible. Certainly more expensive, but having been trained in working as a forester, you're planting trees that will outlive your career and your life often out here in the Northwest. So when I look at the cutover lands, I just think about the Nisqually experience, that when the land trust started 31 years ago, basically none of the riparian area of the Nisqually salmon bearing was in any kind of permit protection, and we're now sitting at 84%.
Congratulations, that's great work.
Yeah, through land trust efforts, through Tacoma Power and mitigation for the dams, through agreements with Joint Base Lewis McChord. So I mean, it's been a whole group of an effort to do, but it's just each little piece, it will grow back, it will become forest again, and it just sometimes it's just not going to be in our lifetime. Gabe asked us, can we speak about tribal engagement? What are your common objectives or conflicting objectives? And here in the Nisqually watershed, we work really closely with the Nisqually Indian tribe. We actually helped them get the first green infrastructure clean water revolving fund loan, which we're just helping them finalize now. And with that, they'll have a little over $14 million to purchase land. So that's up to 3,500 acres. So we're going to help them figure out which lands they want to do and help them with management. So for us, it's been a common objective. We consider ourselves the Nisqually Community Forest a salmon forest. The Nisqually tribe is lead entity for salmon recovery. They strongly agree with that. They've helped us get salmon funding for some of our forests. As they become landowners, I can see that recreation and forest use will be, there'll be some areas that the tribe will want to reserve for tribal members, different hunting seasons and things like that, that may cause conflict in the future, but they'll be the landowner. It's people may grumble, but as a landowner, you get the right to set how you want to do that. So for us, we really have common objectives. We don't really have any conflicting objectives. Recreation may be the one place where there might be conflict. So that's how it's worked for us. Do you have anything on that, Erik?
Sure, yeah. So the Chimacum Ridge is in the traditional territory of the Chimacum people and the S'Klallam tribe, and so the S'Klallam is the organized tribe around here. And so we've been working with Jamestown S'Klallam, Port Gamble S'Klallam to help understand how would a community forest best service their interests and their needs. And so I presented at a tribal council meeting at one point at the beginning of this process to initially invite the tribe to be part of the projects team, but they've been invited to so many different things. It's just, I didn't have the right capacity to engage at that level at that point, but more of those presentations is really, I think, what we decided would be best. So just a regular communication with them about this. And then we also did a tour with them in the Port Gamble S'Klallam tribe, and to kind of understand the land and understand what the resources are out there. And ultimately sort of coming to conclusion somewhat described in the strategic vision framework that there will be some base inherent access and rights for the tribes to use resources from the property, in particular, the harvests of berries and the harvest of food sources and maybe other resources as well. And being just really explicit up front that this is meant to sort of be a place for tribal use of traditional uses of harvest and gathering and things like that. And so everybody's really excited about that and trying to make sure that is embedded in all the management planning that goes on from here. So I haven't found any conflicting objectives necessarily at all yet. They've been all great partners so far over the last several decades in our conservation objectives in general. We're all on the same page on a lot of this. And we've also done some, joint conservation projects just down the road from Chimacum Ridge. So we consider them Jamestown S'Klallam tribe in particular, a really strong conservation partner.
Great. Lynn Shorn asked, from what organizations do you buy trees? That was somewhat covered in our first session, the OSU study on community forest. Out here, we're generally buying from industrial forest landowners. Sometimes there could be state lands or government lands that might be available for swap or things like that, but generally we're buying from industrial forest landowners. John Purcell asked, has there been any interaction with the Cascadia bioregion organization? It seemed that a biological view of regions rather than artificial state and county borders would be helpful. And I'm personally not familiar with the Cascadia bioregion organization, so I don't have any yet, but I will soon.
Yeah, no, we haven't done anything in particular. I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, some of the Cascadia bioregion concept is aligned with, this approach to, land management, land stewardship. So, but we haven't really otherwise engaged with that.
Great. Well, we are coming up to the end of our time, so I really want to thank Julie and Erik for being our presenters for this panel. Really appreciate that. Appreciate everybody participating and all the great questions. We do have a third session coming up at 1, so if you're interested, grab a quick lunch for half an hour, and then the third session will be silvicultural outcomes study. And there was a link somewhere here in the chat on making sure you got there to the Eventbrite. But yeah, unless you guys have any final comments, just want to thank everyone and look forward to seeing you all in the next session.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Totally. And I just want to shout out to all the people that have been involved in this last 10 months too, all the staff that have been involved and all the community members. It's been a really big community effort. So I'm grateful for all of that. And some of them are on the call here too. So I just want to give a shout out to them too.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great lunch. See you soon.
Bye.